Hi, Jay. Thanks for being on my podcast today.
Oh, thanks so much, Jody. It's so great to meet you and to be a part of this.
Yeah, I am so excited, Jay. Your book came across my email from Zondervan and it's called I Am Weak, I Am Strong. And I was captivated by the title because I love that verse in the Bible where Paul talks about that. And he talks about God's grace is sufficient for when I am weak, then I am strong. And I love that that's the title of your book. So you have a powerful story of that. And I'd love for you to just start out by kind of giving us a little bit of your background and your story, and then we'll dive into it deeper.
Yeah, that verse, God has given me a master class on just what that verse means in real life. So it started. I was leading a church in California, and things were going well. Things it was the problems I was facing are those good problems. When you're leading a
Yes.
growing, vibrant church, and those were my problems. And then out of nowhere, I had a seizure. I didn't know
Mm.
what hit me, but it hit me and it hit me hard. So I went to the doctor, and long story short of bouncing all over the place, finally I got a call on a Sunday afternoon after I was done speaking. And it was a neurosurgeon who said, Jay, I'm looking at your MRI scan and you have a brain tumor. It's about the
Wow.
size of a ping pong ball and it's right in the center of your brain. And so that scared me. As I went and visited with different surgeons, a lot of them thought it was inoperable, that they weren't going to be able to get to it. But then I met one surgeon who was capable of giving an attempt because it was in the center of my brain. It was very scary, high risk. But the surgeon was very successful. However, after they removed the tumor, they discovered that it was, in fact, cancerous. So
Mm.
I was diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer. And so that's the
Wow.
life I've been living, holding on to the hope of Jesus and his healing hand and his sustaining grace, while also learning what it means to find strength, even at my weakest point. So
Mm.
after that diagnosis, I took my daughter to school and I went to Dunkin' Donuts. And I went to
I love
Dunkin'
this part.
Donuts. Yeah, I went to Dunkin' Donuts. And it was that moment of, is this where you turn and walk away, or is this when you turn to God for
Mm.
strength and understanding? And so, uh, as almost a reflex, I turned to God and I said, in a very direct way, God, what are you doing? What are
Mm.
you doing? Because it made no sense. I have this young daughter. So I'm a new father, a pastor of a young church. Things are going well. And then boom, the bottom drops out. So just say, God, what are you doing? And by the grace of Jesus, Holy Spirit, God, just like he promised, would remind us of the things that Jesus taught through the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit took my mind and my heart, my soul really to Second Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, where, in a very similar situation as the Apostle Paul, he's facing some kind of mysterious illness. He doesn't give us the details, but he prays three times. He prays it through and through that God would remove this. And in essence, God's answer to the Apostle Paul was no.
Mm.
But he did tell Paul, my grace will be sufficient and my power will be displayed or perfected in weakness. So then Paul concludes, well, then when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And in the same way, I concluded the same thing. Okay, well then I guess I'm entering in the weakest season of my life, and I have the opportunity to be stronger than I could ever imagine. And so I left Dunkin' Donuts, thanking God. All right, God, I came to you for understanding. What are you doing? And now I felt like, okay, I'm understanding that God's going to teach me what it means to live within his sufficient grace and what it means to truly be strong when I'm weak. And I knew I was going to have to go through learning what weakness really was to really understand what strength is. So I left Dunkin' Donuts, I got home, and then I prayed a second very important prayer. How can I join you? All right, God,
Mm.
what are you doing? You revealed that to me. Now, how can I join you? And I don't know if I would quite call this the voice of God like I experienced in the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, but I had this little, I'm going to call it a nudge from the Holy Spirit. I got this crazy idea. I thought, what if I attempt something at my weakest that I never thought I could do, even at the prime of my health? And so I
Mm.
thought, what if I attempt an Ironman triathlon while I'm going
Wow.
through cancer treatment? Now, I didn't quite know what an Ironman triathlon was, and I'm assuming a lot of people listening right now might not know either. It's a triathlon, so you swim, then you bike, then you run, And this is like a mega endurance triathlon. So you swim 2.5 miles, then you get on a bike and ride 112. And then when you're done with that, you put on your running shoes and you run a marathon, 26 point something miles. And at the end, you've done 140.6 miles and you have to do it in under 17 hours. And I signed up to do that knowing that I was just barely recovered from a brain surgery. I'd be going through radiation and chemotherapy. And I thought, okay, I don't think I could have done this on my own when I was in peak health. And there's no way I'm going to be able to do this while I'm going through cancer treatment unless God gives me this strength in my weakness. And I knew, this is a physical strength. And I understood that the Bible was talking deeper about a spiritual strength, but I knew that
Right.
this could become a metaphor that God could use to teach me the spiritual truths as I was walking through the physical manifestation of this. And so I
Oh
did.
my
I
goodness.
decided to give it a shot.
Yeah, I have to say that part of the story was really heartfelt. Like, I don't want to give away all the details because I want people to read the book, but you run home like the way it all happened during 2020 and you couldn't do it with other people. So it was like you solo doing it. And when you ran home to your daughter and wife, like I have to tell you, Jay, I was like tearing up. It was just a powerful part of the story. But what I love is that you this God gave you this verse. Like I think a lot of people when they're going through hard things, they ask like, why me, God? Why now? What's going on? Like you asked, like, God, what are you doing? And I love that God showed up and said, I'm going to teach you what this weakness looks like in my strength, right? Like, I love that because sometimes I feel like we do have capabilities to do things and sometimes we do things in our own strength. But really, when God shows up the best and whether it's speaking like you speak and you're a pastor, if I'm speaking or if I'm writing, like my best is when I say, God, do this through me. Holy Spirit, show up and come through me. That's when it's the best. And so you at your weakest moment say, okay, God, I'm going to do something that I can't do in my prime. Like that is so powerful. And I love that part of the book. But I want to go back just a couple minutes I just want to go back to where you had that first surgery because you share about the first surgery and you actually were awake during this surgery. And I first of all, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm a science teacher and I love to I do that part-time. I do my ministry part-time. So I was fascinated with this part and I thought, wow, he was awake. So first of all, I just want you to share a little bit to someone right now who's like really struggling with peace from God right now. Because I know you said that you had this peace that kind of surpassed all understanding in your surgery. And you say spiritual strength is steady in the storm because the Spirit of God is with you. Explain to me how you felt that day of the surgery, the presence of God, and how, like, if someone's hurting right now, like how that can help them.
Yeah. So the night before my surgery, where I knew I was going to go into the surgery, I was going to be awake during the surgery, which just terrified me. What I was most afraid of is that I would have an anxiety attack on the table.
Mm,
They put your skull in a vice so your head won't move. You're strapped down to a table, and I just thought that sounds terrifying. And
right.
if something goes wrong, what if I have an anxiety attack and I'm strapped down to the table? So I was very afraid going into the surgery. And yet the night before the surgery, I experienced peace, a
Mm.
true peace. Not, sometimes you can put yourself in a place where you're just denying what's about to happen. That
You're right,
that
right,
wasn't
right, right.
it. I was fully aware of what I was walking into. I was surrounded by my family and loved ones. And the night before, I remember we were eating pizza, having a beer or two, and when it was time for me to go to bed, I was able to fall asleep. I wasn't, tossing and turning. I slept well. I slept well.
Wow.
And the best that I can explain what happened to me that day, because I'm an anxious person. I run a little anxious. But the peace that I experienced, it was so similar to what we see in God's character through Jesus when he calms the storm. When
Mm,
Jesus just commands the waves to be still. It's like he did that for my soul, where
wow.
he commanded those waves of anxiety in my soul to be calm, and I felt that calm. And so for those that are going through something difficult, just know that it's in God's character to grant peace, and it's out of your
Mm,
control, right?
it is out of your control. Yeah.
And that's kind of the theme that runs through this book of it's when you just recognize your weakness. I by myself cannot control this anxiety, but God can. And you can turn to God. And I also want to give the caveat, there's been plenty of other times since then that I've been feeling anxious, that I'm afraid. And I say, I say to God, hey, just like you did before, will you just speak to those waves in my soul and command peace? And it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always
Mm,
happen. For whatever reason, that night, God gave me that grace. And when I come to him again in areas of anxiety and he doesn't grant that grace, what he does do is he gives me the strength to tolerate it. And I think there's
mm.
something about when you're feeling anxious and you're able to tolerate it and not try to hide it, not try and push it down. Um, there's a victory in that as well.
Yeah.
And since you asked,
So good.
let me go
Go
one
ahead.
step further on my
Yes,
soapbox.
please,
When it
please.
when it comes to anxiety, I think sometimes pastors, and I speak for myself as a pastor, I think sometimes we can come across that being anxious is a sin,
Mm,
and that sometimes we'll even make the point that God commanded us not to be anxious, to turn to Him and let Him bear our burdens. But when I hear the voice of the Holy Spirit comforting me in my anxiety, his command is more of a comfort. Don't fear. I'm here. Just like I would do to
hmm
my daughter. My daughter's name is Hero. Hero, you don't need to be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. Am I commanding
Mm,
her
so
not to be
good.
afraid? Yes, in the literary
But in a
sense of it.
soft way. Yes.
But what I'm really doing is I'm comforting her. I'm saying, you don't need to be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm here with you. And I think
Mm,
that
that's so good.
yeah, that's truly the character of God in our anxious states.
Yeah, I love that. You know what? I read in a book by Max Lucado. It's called Anxious for Nothing. That verse right before "Do not be anxious for anything" that everyone quotes all the time. Philippians, what is it? Floor 6, I think. Philippians 4:5 ends with "The Lord is near," and then it says, "Do not be anxious for anything." And Max Lucado says, like back when that was written, when Paul wrote it, those weren't separate verses. Like we went in later and said, "This is verse 4:5. This is verse 6." But really, it should read, "The Lord is near. Do not be anxious for anything." So I love that the way you're describing the way God speaks that to you and comforts you is not, do not be anxious, kind of more like but more like I'm here with you, like I'm near, like don't be anxious, I'm here. And I really love that. And I share that a lot to people. Like those verses are supposed to be together. I'm so upset they got separated, but I think it's powerful. So I love that. And I want to talk to you about something you just said, comforting your daughter, because I think you mentioned in your book, and you get really vulnerable, and I love it, about the connection between you and your daughter and your wife, that this is something that was kind of a bigger, I don't want to say bigger strength, but like you, after your surgery, obviously God removed the cancer for the first time, and that was amazing. And then you said, but there was like a second victory, as you felt like God was saying, I want you to connect deeper with your wife and daughter, and do that through vulnerability. And I love this because I read the book How We Love by Milan and Kay Yurkovich. I don't know if you've heard of this book.
Yes, yeah.
Is this the one? Okay. So I was hoping this is the book that you had read too. So this is like my favorite book, Jay, and I get so excited. How We Love Our Kids is the parenting one. How We Love is the marriage one, but it's all about going back and understanding our past and how things trigger us and so you grew up in a home that was kind of a little traumatic. I think you described it in your book, but you get real vulnerable. And this is what you say: vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability takes strength. And then you talk about this miracle that God helped you connect more. And I just love for you to share a little bit more about this, because I think a lot of people, when they think of strength, they think that means we're, but I'm putting my hands up in the air. I know people can't see that, hear that but like we think of this kind of like muster it up within yourself, but really being vulnerable is a way of showing strengths. Tell me more about that and how that played out with your family.
Yeah, as you mentioned, coming from a household that was chaotic, that was dysfunctional, really, I'll put that label on it. Your ability to attach to your loved ones can sometimes be challenging. And,
Mm-hmm.
here I am, this pastor up on stage, and I can be put on a pedestal and things can look good. But when you get really close, in my life, you could see, oh, I struggle with my closest relationships. For whatever
Mm,
reason, I've got this trigger where I just put up these walls of defensiveness. And when I put up those walls, of course, it distanced those connections. And I came out of surgery and I just had something change deep in my soul where I said, what I want more than anything is to enjoy those deep connections. And so that became the new goal in life. More than any achievement, if I can achieve really enjoying those deep connections, mainly my wife and daughter, Natalie and Hero, then that will be a life worthy to be lived. However, it has not been easy because I've lived in
Mm.
this pattern my entire life, and I've been wired to connect this way for my entire life. And so to say, like, I'm going to change it isn't easy. And I'm finding that it takes more strength to develop relationships than it did to finish an Ironman triathlon.
Mm.
Absolutely. And so I'm having to do things like my own individual therapy. My wife and I, after all of this, went into couples therapy for quite some time, and it's a day by day thing. Some days I do better than others, but I'm relearning. I'm relearning, and as I say, at the end of my book, ultimately you're gonna have to check with my wife. At the end of my life, she's gonna be the one to tell you if I cross that finish line or not. Um, but it's difficult, and it's a daily relearning how to do relationship.
Yeah.
Because as you
Well, I
mentioned, vulnerability, that's
yeah, go
tough for
ahead.
me. That's tough, I think, for a lot of people, but we don't talk about it all that much. To open
Right.
myself up is not the easiest thing, and it feels so weak. Oh my goodness, it feels so weak.
But you know what? It's the part that connects us, right? Because I think for the longest time we have this thought, if I'm vulnerable, if I show up weak, then people are going to think less of me. But really, we all have struggles. So when we show up and share those, that's that connection step that you connect on a deeper level than you ever could when you're just saying, oh, look how successful I am, or look at all these good things in my life. Like no one connects in our successes, they connect in our struggles, right? And my book is called Depth. And I don't know if you can see right there, but it's about this tree with the deep roots. And I remember I walked through a divorce and it was not what I wanted for my life. It was 10 years ago and I was just feeling so much shame. And I remember God wanting me to share with others. And I was like, I don't want people to know. We were a strong Christian family. I was like, this is not what I want people to know. And I remember writing this email that was like talking about vulnerability. That was the title of it, vulnerability. And it said, everyone wants to share their highlight reel, but here's the behind the scenes that's happening in my life. And I talked to us about how God was showing up in our family. And I felt like God was saying, send it to everyone you know. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, listen, I'm not announcing this to every single person on my email list. And I felt like God saying, do this. And so I did. I remember getting in the shower and being like, what have I just done? And when I got out of the shower, Jay, I sat down at my computer and I was thinking I'm going to feel judgment. People are going to, but no, none of that. It was I'm going to share you something with you I've never told anyone else. Thank you for being vulnerable. This is what's going on in my life. I heard about people struggling with depression, or, I mean, they were sharing so many things they never had told anyone because they didn't feel like it was a safe person to tell. And here I am sharing my lowest of lows. And then they felt safe to share it. And I realized vulnerability breeds connection. And I love that you say it's not weakness, it's actually strength. And that was one of my favorite chapters in the book. And I commend you for just saying it all, putting it all out there. And I know you and your wife, I'm just so proud of all the work you guys have done. But you say 3 ways to get comfortable with vulnerability. I would love for you to share those if you can add those in, because I think people are struggling with this. Like, how do I get comfortable with it? Share those with us, Jay.
All right, here's the three that I try and employ to the best that I can. First is add emotion. Second is admit embarrassment, and third is admit your weakness, which
Mm,
is at the core of all of this. And so, when it comes to emotion, it's easy to just talk about what you did or what happened. But when you go one step further and say, "This is how it made me feel," that takes it to another level of connection.
so good.
Second, to actually talk about when you're embarrassed, opens
Which is
yourself up.
so hard.
Yes, yeah. And then to say, I'm weak and I need your help. So let me give you very quickly how this has worked and hasn't worked in my life
Okay.
lately.
Yes. I love examples. This is
Yeah.
awesome.
So there was a time I drive home from work and I in prayer just kind of reflect on, like, okay, how am I feeling? How'd this day go? And as I was reflecting on how I was feeling, I thought, okay, I'm going to tell Natalie about that when I get home, the feeling part. And I would. And then I kind of stopped doing it. You know, when you set a goal of every day
Yes.
I'm going to do this and you do it for a while and then it fades away. Um,
Yes.
and then second, embarrassment, actually acknowledging that embarrassment, same thing. I'd come home and every day I wanted to share one thing that embarrassed me. When I was a youth pastor, one of the best things that we would do in small group situations, we say, what's your high and low? What was the best part of your day
Yes.
and what's the worst part? And so it's almost being a youth group kid again and actually sharing not just the best part of my day, but the worst part. Um,
Mm.
and again, I would do that every day until I kind of forgot. And then lastly, well, before I move on, let me go back to that. It is so amazing to me how easy it is to forget what you wanted to remember.
I think it's our age, Jay. I'm sorry to say. I think it's I don't know if you're the same age as me, but I forget things all the I have to write it down or it's like, what did I come upstairs for? You know?
I guess so. I guess so. It's been my whole life of forgetting what I need to remember. And actually, for me, writing this book has helped me with that because it's something to
Mm,
come back to. And just right now, in this podcast, in this conversation, it's reminding me I got to get back to that. Those two things I need to get back to. Uh,
I
the
love that.
the third of acknowledging weakness, I think that this has been rocked to my very core a little more, and this has become a consistent part of me. Just last night, I was talking with Natalie, and I said, "Hey, I have an infusion on Tuesday, so chemotherapy infusion on Tuesday, and I don't want to go alone." Where before I would never say that. I got this. No big deal. It might be a little creepy for me, but I'm good. I'm good. And I learned in the past by doing that, I pushed her further away. And so, Natalie, she's a professor, she's a dean, she's busy. She's busy. And so, I kind of tried to ease my way into it. Hey, if you can do it, no big deal, no big deal. I don't want to bother you, but I would, if you could, I'd love for you to come with me to the infusion on Tuesday. And she's so sweet, she's like, yeah, I'm there. And she said, what? It's not a bother. It's not a bother, but that's my own insecurity there. And it's
Hmm.
not until I go, okay, I'm weak. I need to ask for help. It's not until then that I get to feel that connection of her saying, you're not a bother. I'm there. I'm with you. And it's not easy to do, but I'm trying to do it more consistent.
Yeah, and she probably wants to be there with you. I think that's something that I had a friend sadly who got cancer diagnosis. I went to her with her to the chemo appointments, and it was a joy to be able to be a part of it with her and help her. Not a joy, that's not the right word, but it was special. Let me say that again. It was special to be able to be there with her. And I know she couldn't drive herself there and back. She would feel really tired after. And so it wasn't anything where it felt like a burden. Like it actually felt like a way we connected deeper. So I bet you it actually is a way your wife, she probably is happy that you asked her, you know? And I think that's it. I think we have a part of that feeling like vulnerable and that weakness is like, I don't want to ask anyone for help, but people want to offer help. People are waiting for to say, what can I do to help? And we have to be able to not accept that help. And I think that is a struggle for a lot of people. And in the book, one of my favorite parts is all the ways God had people show up on this journey, this Ironman journey. Let's get to that because it's so exciting, this part of the story. But I mean, you hadn't even ran a marathon in your life, Jay, right? You had not done any of these three things before you did them all on the same day. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a goal, like a beyond all goals. And so, I love how you shared about Margaret, this coach that came alongside you and how she was so integral in your leg of the race at the end there and how you met her through another guy named Willie. I mean, the people in your life, the way God kept providing. I like to say, what if your greatest heartbreak catapults you to your greatest growth? That's the question I asked on the back of my book. Like, what if that one thing you wish you didn't have in your life was the very thing that God used to grow your roots deeper? And I feel like this diagnosis that you have, this brain tumor, this is what's helped you catapult so much growth with your vulnerability, growth in asking for help, and growth in just God showing up. And so, did you see that in your life? Do you feel like your roots grew deeper in the middle of all this?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't realize how hard it was for me to accept help until I went through this and actually until I wrote it out in this
Yeah, that's
book. And then
probably
you can
true.
start to
Yeah.
see those themes. And as you're advising others, you're like, oh my gosh, I needed this. I needed to understand this. And yeah, one of the things I learned is when you pray the simple prayer to God, help, that one word
Mm,
prayer, help, he most often responds by sending his people. His
yes.
people are the help that he sends. And we all know that God has commanded us to carry one another's burdens. But I think we also have to recognize that if he's given us that commandment, then it also means that we have to allow others to carry our burdens. It's just as faithful to allow somebody to carry your burden as it is to carry someone else's burden. And
Mm,
that's something that I learned, and it's hard to do, but I'm trying to continue to practice it. And so the moment that you mentioned in my race, after 120 miles, I was feeling good until I wasn't. All of a sudden, everything turned on me. I knew somehow the chemotherapy treatment was gonna be a major factor and obstacle in this race. And that's exactly what happened. All the nutrition that I was taking in through the race so that my body didn't cramp up. That was my major fear because Ironman has these highlight reels of elite athletes just cramping up, crawling across the finish line. And I
wow.
knew, like, okay, the only way to combat this is through nutrition. So I'm taking in nutrition, hydration, everything's going to plan. However, none of it was being absorbed through my gut lining because that's one of the things about chemotherapy is it destroys your digestive system. So I'm not
Wow.
actually getting all the nutrition that's put into me. And at some point, as it's been sitting there for 120 miles, it doesn't want to stay in anymore. And so I felt like I was running a marathon with stomach flu.
Wow.
And I had, 20 miles left to go. And
Which is
I
a lot.
knew, yeah, that's a lot. It's a long way still to
Yeah.
go to run that far. And I knew there's no way you can go out and run a marathon without taking a sip of water. And if I can't hold water down, then my body's going to cramp up. And no matter what kind of willpower I had, it wasn't going to be strong enough to crawl 20 miles across the
Right.
finish line. And so I just thought, well, my race is done. And I had to make peace with, I gave it a good shot. I tried my all, but that's not going to be enough. And so I prayed, help, prayed,
Mm,
word, help. And God, God responded immediately, but I didn't know for another 5 miles that he responded. And this is what he did. My coach, who lived a couple states away, who is an elite Ironman athlete, who also is a breast cancer survivor, who God just kind of, I don't want to say magically, there's a better word for it, but just so graciously brought her into my life in a way that I could have never orchestrated on my own. So, anyway, she had flown out to California for my race. And just like she coached me from a distance using my smartwatch, she was following me by my smartwatch and she saw that I was in trouble. She saw my vitals, she saw my pacing, she saw I was in trouble, and she was able to track me down to the next aid station that was coming up. And so she did. She went to the aid station. And as I came, I saw that she had put her running shoes on and she
wow.
started running beside me. And I'm a rookie. I don't know what's going on. She's a veteran, she's an expert, and she starts troubleshooting with me. And as she solves the problem of the balance that was incorrect with my electrolytes, I had too many electrolytes. She was able to help me correct that using a tablet of salt that I put under my tongue, and she ran with me so that I didn't give up. All of a sudden, things balanced out, and I knew I've got a shot at this. I've got a shot. I can
So
hold down
cool.
nutrition. And sure enough, because of that moment, I was able to finish the race. And as I look back, I prayed for help. And it was probably right around that moment that my coach, Margaret, was following me, my watch and said, "Uh-oh, he's in trouble." And it took her about 5 miles to track me down and get to the aid station. And those 5 miles were really tough. They felt so lonely. But if only I had a larger view to see, oh, God heard, God cares, He's responding, and help is coming. Those 5 miles would have been a lot easier. But I
Mm.
kept going step by step, and then help arrived, and it pushed me across the finish line. It was pretty miraculous.
Pretty miraculous. Yeah, it's phenomenal. The whole story is phenomenal. I just loved it. And I love what you just said. I wish I had the eyes to see because we sometimes look at our life and we see the small little puzzle piece and we're like, wait, why did you give this to me, God? Like, why do I have this brain tumor? Or why did I have to go through a divorce? Or why did I have a miscarriage? Or why do I have infertility? Or whatever they have, right? But God sees the bigger puzzle cover and he sees the stuff that we can't see. And so you share this in your book, and it's actually a story I share when I speak, and I love it. I love when there's confirmation of what I'm sharing and someone else is sharing. But you give that story when Elijah is with his servant, and he actually prays, open his spiritual eyes to see, right? There's a moment in time where all these people are coming to kill Elijah, and the servant's freaking out, and he's like, look, all these people. And Elijah's all calm. He's like, there's more than, or there's more on our side than on theirs. And he's going, the servant's going, I don't know what you're seeing, but all I see is people coming to get us. And then he prays, Lord, let him see. And you talked about opening our spiritual eyes. And I love to share this when I speak it. Like sometimes there's a perspective that we can't see. And I love that hindsight, right? That's one of the gifts later in life. Now you can see that at that exact moment you said help, God is putting someone into place. But for 5 miles, you didn't know that. But he's working. And there's that song with the Waymaker, like, even when you can't feel it, he's working. And even when you can't see it, he's working. I just want someone to hear that today. Like, you may not hear it and you may not see it and you may not feel it, but God is working. And sometimes it's going to take years to maybe see it, or maybe months or hours, like you figured it out. But I love that. And if we could just ask God, open our spiritual eyes and let me see what you see that I can't see. I think that's a really powerful perspective. But I would love for you to speak to someone right now. They're in the middle of it. They just got the diagnosis from the doctor. They just got the divorce papers. They just looked on the ultrasound and there wasn't a heartbeat. They are just getting that devastating news and they're going, I don't understand. How would you encourage them as you've walked this journey with God now? He's been there. His presence has been so phenomenal to you. What would you say to them right now to encourage them?
So hold on to hope. Hold on to
Mm,
hope. You've been knocked down. Life has knocked you down. Your enemy has knocked you down. But do not let go of hope, because Jesus is with you. And if you hold on to the hope of Jesus, by his strength, you will get back up. You'll get back up and you'll stay strong and you'll press on and you will finish the race. God has put dreams, he has put calling on your life. And of course, your enemy wants to steal those dreams. Of course, he wants to knock you out of the race. Of course. But your God is stronger and he cares and he loves. So hold on to that hope and watch as you rise up again and you learn what it means to be strong even when you're weak. And you'll look
mm,
back and you'll see God's gracious hand sustaining you every step of the way. But you've got to hold on right now. Hold on.
that's so powerful. I have like goosebumps all over my body, Jay. That's so awesome. All right. I have one last thing. You say this: your moment of greatest weakness will be your biggest opportunity to make an impact. I think this is so true. I love Rick Warren always says your greatest heartbreak will be your greatest ministry. And I think that we don't always want to hear that, right? Like I didn't want to admit that I had gone through a divorce, but that's where I enter in and help people in a way I could not have if I hadn't walked through that. And I also walked through a miscarriage and my dear friend with her cancer diagnosis. I've had multiple things where God's just taken me this low place, but that's how I now come in and help others. And so tell me how you seen that in your life, and then maybe again for someone that just can't see that, like they just like you say anything is possible, like with God anything is possible, and they're just like I don't see that, I don't feel that. Like just one more. I know someone's hurting right now and they just need. I love that. Hold on to hope. Like practically, maybe what does that look like too? Like what is there something that being in God's word is one way, but like just I don't know. Does that make sense? Like what practically can they do to like hold on and trust that this is going to be where God's going to use them.
Well, that's a huge question of
I
what,
know.
of what part. But fortunately, I wrote a book that has a lot of the what. The book I'm Weak, I'm Strong. It's not a memoir. It really is a field guide to resilient faith that leads to resilient living. And so there are plenty of really practical applications in there. But what I want to speak to is the questions that you were asking before. When you find purpose in your pain,
Mm,
when you see some significance in the suffering, that allows you to hold on to hope. That allows you to keep going and not give up. And for me, uh, the Ironman triathlon, that wasn't it. It was doing something and dedicating it to my daughter, showing my daughter how much that I loved her. And some people say, well, what is that? What does a triathlon have to do with your daughter? I was able to look my daughter in the eyes and say, hey, I'm getting up and I am dedicating this race to you. This is for you. I want you to see that when we're weak, that we're strong, and that God's promises can be trusted. This is for you, hero. This is for you. And so
mm,
once I saw the opportunity to love my daughter, that gave me the power I needed to keep going. And it makes me think of Genesis chapter 20 or chapter 40. I think chapter 40. Sorry, I didn't write this in the book.
That's
But
okay.
you have Joseph in this moment of being face to face with his brothers who sold him into slavery, and he says, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And that word intended means to weave together. So the web that you wove, this evil web to sell me into slavery, to make my father think I was dead. Joseph saying to his brothers, he says, no, God took that and he wove it together for good, to save his people. Joseph ends up
Mm,
in Egypt for the purpose of saving God's people. Now, did God cause that? No. But the evil intentions of his brothers, God said, I can work with that. I can use this for you, Joseph, to do good in this world. And when we think about our suffering, God will use it. God
mm,
will use it to comfort others and to serve others and to love others. And so if you're going through a difficult time right now, pray and ask God, where's the opportunity for me to love others in this? And it changes everything. Instead of that feeling of self-pity, oh, woe is me, why is this happening to me? It's how can I, as I go through this difficult, heartbreaking time, how can I use this to show love for others? And he'll wow you. Whatever
mm.
he decides to, however he decides to call you into it, he will use you to serve and love others. He has a purpose for you, even when you're knocked down, even when it seems like game over. He's got a purpose for you. And that purpose will sustain you through the pain.
That is so good. Okay, that's Genesis 50:20. It's one of my favorite
Uh,
verses. So that's the reference, Jay. But
is it
listen,
20? Is it 40?
yeah, that's okay. I love it. I was like, I gotcha. But listen, Joseph's one of these people I want to meet in heaven. When I get there, he's like, okay, I want to meet Jesus first, right? For sure. But then Joseph, like, how did you do it? How did you endure through all of those trials? Oh, yeah, I just love that verse. And I love what you said. God, how can I use this to help others? Like, that is a beautiful perspective piece in the middle of all of it. How can I love the thing. I think you say, how can I cooperate with you? How can I partner with you? And I think that's really powerful, Jay. Oh, this has been so fun, Jay. Okay, this is my favorite question to ask all my guests. What life changing books have, besides the Bible, of course, because that's the best, but impacted you, changed your life, and made an impact?
The book that I'll bring up right now has directly impacted this season of my life. And it's the Henry Blackaby Experiencing God,
Mm,
especially the workbook where you're just getting hands on and you're getting into it. And from that, I learned to pray the prayer, God, where are you working? And how can I cooperate? And I always
mm,
prayed that prayer in ministry, right? God, where are you working in my community? Where are you working in my congregation? Where are you working around me? And how can I then join you in that? But I also learned to pray in my life. God, how are you working in my life right now? What are you up to? And how can I join you? And because I had a rhythm of that, because that was at the core of who I was, because Henry Blackaby taught me that from that book, then when I hit the crisis of my life, I just, with the reflex, did the same thing. What, God, what are you doing? Where are you working?
mm.
And God, how can I cooperate? How can I join you in this? And that's a prayer that you can pray when you're in crisis. And that's a prayer that you can pray when you wake up in the morning and you want to grow spiritually, when you want more spiritual depth, when you want to become more like Jesus Christ. If you pray those two prayers, those are power prayers right there.
Wow. Oh, I'm so excited right now. Those are so strong. And you said depth, which is my favorite word, spiritual depth. That's what I'm all about, growing our roots deep. And Jay, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I loved your book, and I'm so excited. We're going to give away a copy on the podcast. And I highly recommend this book this year. I Am Weak, I Am Strong. It is so great. It's been a joy to have you on the podcast. Thank you, Jay, so much for being my guest this week.
Oh, thank you, Jody.